Today we'll be talking about the slave markets of the 1700s to the 1860s and exploring the impact they had not only on the enslaved African Americans, but also on the white populations, especially landowners and those involved in commerce.
Let's start by looking at the experience of enslaved African Americans. Slave markets and the relentless internal slave trade meant a constant threat of being sold, often forcibly moved from the Upper South to Texas, a journey known as the Second Middle Passage. Urban centers like Galveston and Houston became notorious sites where families were routinely torn apart. Husbands separated from wives, children from parents. These markets treated people as property, as mere commodities to be bought and sold.
The effects were devastating, starting off with trauma and family separation. The ever-present threat of being sold caused immense anxiety. Families could be, and often were, separated without warning. Along with that, rapid population growth and forced labor, with the enslaved population in Texas growing from about 5,000 people in 1835 to over 182,000 people by 1860, largely due to forced migration. Most were sent to labor on cotton and sugar plantations under brutal conditions. And lastly, with dehumanization and violence, the public nature of slave markets reinforced the idea that enslaved people were nothing more than property, not human beings. This justified violence, harsh laws, or slave codes as they were called, and constant degradation.
But the impact wasn't limited to the enslaved. For the white population, especially landowners and merchants, slave markets were central to economic prosperity and social order. Economic opportunity. The trade supplied labor for cash crops like cotton, fueling the state's wealth. Those involved in the trade saw it as a sign of enterprise and prosperity. Social and political power. Owning slaves made it possible by these markets helped establish the planter class as the wealthiest and most powerful group in society. Even whites who didn't own slaves benefited from a racial hierarchy that placed them above all black people. Legal protections. Laws, including the Texas Constitution of 1836, were written to protect slaveholders' rights and ensure the continuation of the system.
To understand the human cost, consider the story of Solomon Northup, a free black man kidnapped from New York. Northup was thrust into the horrors of the slave market starting in Washington, D.C., where he was beaten into accepting a false identity. He was shipped to New Orleans, a major hub of the domestic slave trade, and forced to endure humiliating preparations for sale, washing, shaving, dressing up, and being made to appear smart and lively for buyers. Prospective buyers inspected him and others like livestock, looking for signs of rebellion and physical flaws. Northup witnessed the agony of families being separated, including a mother, Eliza, who was sold apart from her children, a scene he called mournful indeed.
Slave markets functioned as the economic engines of the domestic slave trade. In cities like New Orleans, Richmond, and Charleston, enslaved people were confined in pens, subject to invasive examinations, and auctioned off like property. Family bonds were severed in the process, as profit always came before humanity.
Let's not forget the Middle Passage, the forced voyage across the Atlantic. Millions of Africans endured months in horrendous conditions, chained, packed into ships with barely any space, suffering disease and violence. Around 50% of all the people who crossed the Middle Passage died during the crossing, and survivors faced a lifetime of forced labor and trauma.
In Texas, the port of Galveston became a major point of entry for enslaved people, especially after the transatlantic trade was banned in 1808. While some captives were smuggled in illegally, most arrivals were from other southern states to meet Texas' growing demand for labor. The auctions were dehumanizing spectacles. Enslaved people were cleaned up, dressed in new clothes, and thoroughly inspected before being sold. Family separations were common, husbands from wives, children from parents, with a final cry of "sold" sealing their fate.
The brutality of these markets eventually became a catalyst for change. Vivid reports and eyewitness accounts exposed the sheer cruelty of the system. Abolitionist publications, like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, and narratives from formerly enslaved people, brought the agony of family separation into public view. This transformed the debate over slavery into a profound moral outrage, especially in the North.
Religious conviction also played a crucial role. The Second Great Awakening was a period of religious revival that emphasized personal responsibility and the need to reform society. Many Christian denominations, especially Quakers and evangelical Protestants, came to see slavery as a national sin. They argued that holding and selling human beings violated the Christian principles. Preachers warned that if the nation didn't repent, it would face divine retribution. The moral urgency helped fuel the abolitionist movement and the demand for immediate emancipation.
In summary, slave markets were not only the centers of economic activity, but also sites of immense suffering and injustice. They shaped the lives of both the enslaved and the free, fueled a brutal economy, and eventually helped spark a movement of freedom and equality.